Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. Today, I've got Karen Hewitt with me, and Karen's appeared on the podcast before, but on this version, we are speaking about the big health and safety engagement survey that Karen and her business Leaderlike have recently run. It's a recording of a safety roundtable, so there's lots of interaction and questions coming through, but essentially the question is this: what is engagement within health and safety? Why is it important? What does the safety profession think about it at the moment? In other words, how well are we performing? What are the blockers? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And what should we do with all of that information? To me, engagement is a critical topic. So I'd really encourage you to have a good listen or watch of this, grab the notepad, make some notes, and take some steps to address engagement in your organisation. Hope you enjoy it. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining us, Karen. I'm going to get you to share your slides in a minute. But I thought, just as a bit of context, it'd be worth starting with how are we defining engagement in health and safety within this context, or sort of how should we define it if we're unsure?
Is that a question for me, Christian?
Yes, yeah.
So, well, interestingly enough, the very first question in the survey is about how we define it, because I'm aware there's probably quite a few definitions for it, and engagement is a bit of a management buzzword, I would say. So I thought it was really good to allow that to be part of the discussion. So I may not define it right now, but just see what comes up as we go through it.
What everyone said. Yeah, okay. But why then is engagement important, and why did you decide to do the survey?
I decided to do the survey because I absolutely believe that, assuming we've got the technical foundations for success in health and safety, it's engagement that's going to make the difference, because engagement is going to be the thing that gets people excited, that gets people wanting to take action. So I'm a massive believer in it. I think that if I had to focus my efforts anywhere for health and safety, I would focus it on engagement. So I was really interested to see how the rest of the profession saw it, and also delve a bit more into the challenges, what's working, what's not working, so that maybe there might be a bit of a light bulb moment, and we could collectively think, wow, we need to get after this. And when I start to present the results, there is a little bit of a story forming that I can see, and I'm really interested to discuss it and see what everybody else thinks.
Perfect. That's great, Karen, and we appreciate you coming on and doing this for us. I thought just having that bit of context would be useful for everybody. So why don't I ask you to share your screen then and start running through the slides. For everybody that's watching along, feel free to type any questions into the comments wherever you are, and I'll try my best to monitor those. And if you're on Zoom and you want to come and have a chat with Karen and I, then go to reactions, raise your hand, and I'll call you up and you can do that. So over to you, Karen.
Brilliant. Thanks, Christian. And I think it will, as I talk through this, because you will see that it raises sometimes more questions than answers. So it's absolutely all up for discussion. I'm going to go through it quite quickly to see the key points that came out, and then see what it generates in terms of discussion. So the survey, it was opened up actually to anyone. I knew that it would garner more interest from health and safety professionals. And you'll see, so there were 208 responses. It was open for about 4 weeks, and the majority, 75%, said they were health and safety. So There were a couple of bits of information I asked people to input at the beginning. It was anonymous, and I only asked them to put in their location and their job role. So the results, really, you can only see the location and job role. I know somebody had asked a question about could we break it down by industry, and potentially, having run this survey once, when I go to repeat it, I could look at breaking it down by other factors, getting more responses, breaking it down by industry, which would provide us with some really interesting results. But what we get out with a survey is what we put in, really, the questions that we asked. So you can see 70% responded from the UK. And if we look here, so it was majority health and safety professional. There were a few senior leaders and managers and supervisors as well. So it's a majority opinion from health and safety, and also majority from the UK. Although you can see we did have, a variety of respondents from different parts of the world, Middle East and Europe as well. And so this is what I was referring to at the beginning, Christian. My very first question really was around definition, or when I hear the term health and safety engagement, what do I think about? Because I just when I use that word engagement, I think, are people actually defining it the same, or are they thinking about something different? And interestingly enough, the majority responses here, the two biggest boxes, were around involving people on how it's implemented on the ground and creating ownership of health and safety. So involvement and ownership came up strongest, but you can see that there were other votes for other things. So, and also there was, more things in the something else box where people gave other definitions. So on the one hand, there seems to be an agreement around involvement and ownership. On the other hand, it is, as I suspected, a multifaceted term. I don't think it's so much around us not aligning on the definition, but it involves so many different things. It involves getting people excited, giving it a more positive image, getting people involved, taking ownership. There are so many aspects to it, which I think you could see here through the responses.
Yeah. And was this what you were expecting, or was this a bit of a surprise to you, the way that this particular question was answered?
I think this was what I was expecting. I think it's consolidated my view around ownership. I think this word ownership is really important, because the real value is when it's not something, health and safety isn't just an extra job. It's when people feel it's part of what they do, when people feel that it's their topic.
And it's not something that's done for you. It's something that's done with you.
Yeah. I think that ownership, that's when you've got success. So I'm not really surprised to see ownership up there. And I guess seeing that people, think it's this is why it's so difficult, I think, because it's not just about involvement and ownership. There's a lot more in there.
Yeah.
And this is probably why we're discussing it today, because it's not as simple as it looks. And then, why do people feel it's important? So again, this sort of backs that up, because if we engage, it's going to drive ownership, and also it's key to a safe and healthier workforce. So I think I see a sense of alignment on why it's important. When I said why I thought it was important, I thought it was absolutely the key to better health and safety outcomes. It feels here as though we're in agreement on this. So I'm going to keep going unless anyone stops me. And this was a question that for me raised more questions than answers. Do we have a dedicated long-term strategy for employee engagement? Because what I see in organizations is that people recognize that it's important, but it tends to be more of a series of short-term initiatives, which means you are engaging people, but it's not necessarily sticking. And if you're engaging people on many different topics, you're maybe losing the potential of the common thread, which is the consistency of the repeated message. So that's why I asked that question, but we seem to have a variety of responses here. Some saying yes, it is a series of initiatives. Some saying no, actually, it's integrated into our strategy, and some saying we have a dedicated engagement strategy. So the question here is about whether it's sticking or not.
Yeah. Would you just go back to that slide, Karen? Because I'm interested to just think about the people who answered yes, saying that we've got a engagement in health and safety strategy, very specific around health and safety. What's your view, or what's your experience on whether there's an argument to say that bolting on the phrase health and safety to engagement is a good or a bad thing, or whether that makes it more or less effective? I think you can sort of see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think if with anything, when you're starting something new, I think putting a dedicated focus on it is the thing that will get you traction. And then as you start to get traction, it can then become something which is more part of what you do. So I would definitely advocate that if you don't have a dedicated strategy for it and you want to make a difference with it, if you don't have enough engagement in your organization, it's worth starting out with a dedicated strategy, but a strategy that dovetails into what you're already doing. Does that make sense? So it's dedicated, but it's part of the bigger picture.
Yeah, and I think a clear delineation between, if you're just starting, have that focus, and perhaps you want to be very clearly defined on what you're doing, and then there's a difference if you're a bit more mature, that perhaps it could get to the point where you want to have something around engagement more broadly, and safety would be a key part of that, just like it's a key part of everything else that you do, but perhaps it isn't the one and only thing that you're asking about at that particular point in time. So yeah, agree with you on that.
Okay. And then this was probably something that really surprised me when I looked at these results. So this question is about what percentage of your activity for health and safety is engagement compared to compliance? And you can see the majority there, say 10 to 25%. Okay, so this is the status quo. How much time are we spending on engagement compared to compliance? So a quarter of our time or less. And then I asked the question, how much time should we be spending on engagement versus compliance? And look how that result shifts, that most people are saying we should be spending a lot more time on it.
So it's almost
Which
the
really,
exact same number, isn't it? Saying that we should be spending 75% or more of our time. It's 40%, and that's basically the exact same number that's currently saying we're spending 10 to 25%. So the gap is massive.
yeah, which led me to think, okay, people want to be spending more time on it. So why aren't they? What's stopping them? And this is where we're going with the next question. So in my company, I feel people don't engage mainly in health and safety because, remember, this is a health and safety person point of view. If we were to ask the people themselves, employees themselves, they might give us a different response. But this is the feeling here. The two biggest responses, the feeling that health and safety is done to them rather than with them, and the feeling that health and safety is an extra. So this takes us back to that need for the dedicated strategy for engagement, because if it's dedicated, you're going to be spending time working with people. And if it's part of the bigger picture, it needs to be part of the wider health and safety strategy and the wider business strategy, then it's going to become more integrated. So I think you can start to see how these answers are working together. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, and it takes us back to that question of definition as well, doesn't it? Because, and I even used that phrase, didn't I? That it's something done. It's not something done for you; it's done with you. And the point about taking responsibility is kind of resonating with, it's integrated into the work rather than being an extra. So, yeah, it sort of really supports that definition piece too.
Yeah, because where I've had success in large organizations is when I have had a dedicated engagement strategy, but it's been long-term strategic as done with the rest of health and safety in mind, and also the rest of the organization. So it fits in with the organizational values and with the leadership behaviors. So it's not in isolation. And then the format we use most for engaging people. So the big box there is Toolbox Talks, interestingly enough. And you can also see the something else box is quite big. So I've gone through and trawled through the additional comments in here. And people are either giving more detail around all the rest of these boxes here, or they're adding extra things, like safety tours, safety stand downs, different names for the same thing. So I guess what this leads me to conclude is there are ample opportunities to engage with people on health and safety, because I've got a whole list of them in the something else comments. There are so many different opportunities. And I guess my question would be now, how consistent are we being with our messaging? Because if we've got all these opportunities out there to engage, to get people involved, have great conversations, are we giving any kind of direction around what the key messages are? So for all these stakeholders that are potentially leading these conversations about health and safety, what is the message?
I suppose another interesting thing to consider here would be these are the media by which we're engaging people at the moment, but actually, if we could overlay the efficacy of the media, then that might be interesting from the perspective that, we're doing a lot of toolbox talks, but actually are those toolbox talks resonating with people? Are they actually driving engagement up? Or might we be better to do more gamification, because that's a more effective way of driving engagement, and therefore we should shift the way that we're doing things?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, Christian. And also what occurs to me as you speak is we're also relying a lot on the messenger here. So these toolbox talks are going to be as engaging as not just the format, as you talk about the efficacy of the format, but also the messenger, the person that's delivering the format.
Yeah.
So I do work with health and safety teams to help them identify their key stakeholders and help them to get on board with what message they need to be delivering. So, if supervisors are delivering the toolbox talks, how do we make sure that they're on message and they're doing it in an engaging way?
There's a good question in the chat here, Karen, actually from Arvin, which is, how can we personalize safety messaging to resonate with different employee motivations and risk perceptions? I think that's kind of aligned to what we were just talking about. Any thoughts on, or any ways you've seen people do that effectively before?
Yeah, so it's always going to be a balance between the big picture and the detail. And I think that inevitably you have to put people in groups and look at how do you come up with a single cohesive message that resonates with everyone, but also can be adapted to different stakeholder groups. So if you were to picture a matrix, and on the one side you had your stakeholder groups, and then on the other hand you had the message, then in the different boxes you can work on your adaptations of the message. So, the way I've done that when I've been designing programs, I will make sure that I've got a representative of each of my stakeholder groups. So I've got a full representation of the business. And then I come up with the message and I say, how would we have to adapt this message? So you've got a single message, but you've also got in that matrix all of your examples on how they would be adapted.
Yeah, and
sense?
it's also not just about the content of the message, it's also the method of how the message is put across, isn't it? I mean, I had a guy called Nathan Whitbread on the podcast recently, talking about neurodiversity and the importance of, the medium through which we deliver a message, in terms of, is it audio, or is it written, or is it infographics or videos, or because all of these things in terms of personalization and getting the key messaging through to people, some people are going to resonate more with different types of messages than others.
Yeah, and one great way actually to personalize your message. So let's say you've done your research, you know you've come up with some messages that are going to resonate in some way with every stakeholder group. And then you get in front of a group of them, you deliver your message and say, how would this work in your working environment? What does this mean to you? What example do you have of this in your working environment? And they will give you an example. And I'll explain what I mean here. So, in one program I designed, I came up with some habits of safety leadership, and one was about taking a break for routine tasks. So, when you knew you were in a routine task, taking a step back so that your brain could sort of reset and you weren't into complacency mode. But routine tasks look different for different people. So, a routine task in one business might be forklift truck operations. You might have people that are driving for hours on end, just purely driving forklift trucks. In another business, it might be people on their mobile phones that might be the routine operation. So you can still have a standard message, but the personalization comes in how people apply it. And you're only going to know that by asking them. So that's why I said I came up with a matrix for each of those leadership behaviors. I came up with an example based on the conversation I'd had with the key stakeholder. But if you actually get in front of groups of people, they might give you different examples. And that's when they engage, when you say, okay, here's the behavior. How would you do it? How would you apply it? Or which one of these behaviors makes sense to you? Which one do you like and why? And then you start to get the great personalization that comes back and the engagement because you've asked people how they make it personal to them.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, shall I keep going?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I keep interrupting, don't I?
No, that's okay. This is an exciting topic and it's got a lot of elements to it. So
Definitely.
what techniques do you use the most to make employee engagement stick or last? So you can see the most popular thing here, which is what we were talking about really, is creating opportunities for conversations. And then you have the challenges to make sure it's on message and the person having that conversation is allowing for the personalization and the two-way engagement. There are also a few comments in the something else box, and other people suggested different things that I didn't have on the list, like, for example, engaging people by not talking about health and safety, by talking about planning, the wider risks, talking about the business, which is really interesting as well, also an interesting option.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the looking at that response there, this means there is a lot of personalization opportunities. But equally, it seems that perhaps there's an opportunity around making it stick in a bit more of a systemized and process-driven way. Because if we're creating opportunities for conversations day to day, that's obviously great from on the one hand, but do we know that those conversations are absolutely happening on the other hand? And are those conversations, going back to the prior point, being done in the best way because we're dependent on the individual? Whereas if we could design engagement into business processes, if we could drip feed more messages out, etc., perhaps we could get a more robust and consistent message going.
Yeah, and I tend to work on a 70-30 rule. So I do my research with the key stakeholders to get 70% of my message. And then because in engagement by definition, according to the first question I asked in this survey was about involvement and ownership. You have to leave room and space for somebody else to get involved, which is why I do the 70-30. 70% is my message based on the research I've done with the right people. But I leave that 30%, which is really about asking the open question and say, what do you think? So it's going to take a bit longer, but you have to create the space for other people to
Yeah.
get involved, which is what we're doing today, really.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah.
I'm 70% on my message, and I'm keeping my eye. I know you've got your eye on the chat, Christian, and I've got my
Yeah,
eye on you to see what you think. So if I've
yeah.
kind of gone 71, then somebody please raise a red flag now. Of course, we are slightly constrained by the time frame, and I'm sure you want to see the rest of these questions, but I'm roughly going 70-30.
Yeah.
And then remember right at the beginning, we had that result where people wanted to be spending a lot more time on engagement than they were. And I said, well, makes me wonder, why are they not? So biggest challenges, lack of time. Well, that makes sense. Why have we not got enough time? Senior management undermining the health and safety messages. So I guess if senior management aren't on board, then they're potentially not going to be putting the focus on it that you would want, which makes your job more difficult. There may be going to be not freeing you up to do things. They may be not influencing the other stakeholders. So there's a bit of a catch-22 here, I would say, that until we get senior management fully on board, that's going to have a big influence on the lack of time we have, because they're door openers.
And if they're coming from a compliance mindset, then that's going to be influencing that proportion of time spent on compliance-based activities versus engagement-based activities as well, isn't it?
Yeah, because our boss really defines what we focus on and how we spend our time. So if senior management aren't on board, you're going to have a knock-on effect further down. And when we look up to our boss, if our boss is not freeing us up to spend time on the things we want to be spending time on, then it's because maybe their boss isn't and their boss isn't. So I see the two issues as very closely linked, which is quite exciting because it gives us an opportunity to know where to start.
Hmm.
And then which group of people drives employee engagement most? Well, no surprises here, health and safety, because we've defined the engagement opportunity as getting more ownership. And we've said that we're not spending enough time on engagement, not as much time as we would want to. So it's no surprise that we are still the main drivers of it. But what's really interesting here is I see in organizations that our next port of call is kind of line management, managers and supervisors. So getting management to take responsibility and accountability for health and safety and drive the message. But also internal comms here has no one that's answered that. HR as well. And HR and internal comms are often driving the strategic agenda. They are driving the agenda of senior leadership. So for me, getting them on board could have a massive payoff in terms of engagement. If we can get to be part of the HR and the internal comms agenda in partnership, that's going to really help us with engagement.
Yeah, the answer, I suppose, is that we would want all of the above to be involved. The question is, I suppose, who is the predominant group of people that are doing it. I suppose one good thing is that the answer wasn't me, because that suggests that the people taking the survey, responding to the survey, have got some good systems and processes in place that aren't reliant upon them. So that's definitely a positive message.
Yeah, and I think that we do need everyone involved. I'm thinking about, it's a really tough job sometimes in being strategic, and I think HR and internal comms are really important to this. So that's why I put them on there.
Yeah.
And then the hardest group of people to engage, well, no surprise here. We've got the top answer as senior leaders, although we can see that there are some other answers there, non-operational and office staff, because potentially they don't see the risks in the same way, or they don't see their connection to safety on the front line. So I guess this just represents for me how hard engagement is, and it backs up all of the previous answers, about not enough time, wanting to spend more time, and senior leaders being the tough nut to crack.
And also the fact that it's not overwhelmingly saying one thing suggests that there is an opportunity, but both a challenge and an opportunity, because we can improve across the board, it looks like to me, based on these responses. It's not as if we're saying 80% senior leaders is the hardest, and therefore, we're doing well everywhere else. It looks like we've got room to grow and room to improve everywhere. But obviously, we do need a focus on what we can do to get through to the senior leadership team more effectively. Given especially some of the other answers where we need them on. What we've seen before is we need the senior leadership on board to achieve the outcomes. So if we're struggling to get through to them, then that needs to be something we should be focusing on.
Yeah, what I often see is because there's never enough time and there's never enough money, obviously, in the world. We are in a world of finite resources. Often the engagement gets steered towards the highest risk areas, the operational areas, which is perfectly understandable. But what that misses is there's sometimes, for example, non-operational and office staff, senior leaders, they are the ones that are making the decisions that could have an impact on safety further down the line. For example, procurement in the equipment that they buy, what they sign off on, HR, the link to competency, the type of people involved. So there are decisions being made at the top of the organization that have an indirect impact. So it's been a bit strategic and thinking, well, we want to solve the issue of the risk in the operational areas, but it's not just about what people are doing and the working environment. It's about all the decisions and actions that lead into that and who's holding the keys to that. So we need to be tackling the issue on all fronts, really. And then in my company, I have the best best health and safety conversations with frontline workers. So I could understand that because probably they're the ones that are the last line of defense, so they understand the risk. So they're effectively already engaged. It already matters to them. Yeah, and senior leaders actually do feature slightly there, supervisors and team leaders. And then the best time to have a conversation about health and safety is so the top answer there is when people are doing the work. Interestingly enough, somebody mentioned in the another time box at the start of a project, and that's actually something that I could have put on this list of options. So when you're at the start of anything, when you're designing safety, and it's a lot easier when people are first coming into the company, when you're first starting a new project. So that was mentioned in the another time. And then here's an interesting one. When I talk about health and safety to people, I feel most often like A. And I had some interesting responses in the other as well, that led me to believe that there are some ups and downs of being a health and safety professional. You have to be all things to all people. You have to liaise with different stakeholder groups, some on board, some not. There are times that you probably feel good because you're a trusted advisor, and other times you don't feel so good because you're seen more as the fun police or the person that's giving somebody an extra job to do. But interestingly enough, trusted advisor expert comes out on top. So I wonder if that's how most people see themselves. And our identity is quite often linked to our self-esteem. It's a big driver of behavior. So I wonder if that is a nice to have, that we like to be seen in that way as the go-to person. Any
I think we'd
thoughts?
all, well, I think we'd all like to be seen that way, wouldn't we? I suppose what this shows is that it's a multifaceted role. And I guess the other thing to consider here, which would be interesting, would be to ask the question in reverse, as in, not how do we feel when we're speaking to people in our company, but what do the people in our company feel about us when we're speaking to them? And it'd be interesting to see if that, if the results here of our perception of ourselves was mirrored in theirs, because if, for example, the result from them was that they saw us more as the policeman slash traffic warden, then that suggests there's again another growth opportunity around our communication.
Yeah, I also think there's a potential additional category in here, which is change maker or change agent, because effectively we are creating change. It's kind of implied in the coach option here, because if we are purely coaching, if we're doing our coaching well, we will be empowering others to create change. So if you think about, we wanted to create more involvement and ownership, so something has to change.
Yeah. There's a bit of engagement in the chat about you can go through the fact you can go through all of these in the matter of one day. So you do have to wear all these hats.
Yeah, aren't we brilliant? I think we give ourselves a pat on the back here. We are the true flexible professional, but I guess it indicates that we're kind of going through the same thing, because this is like a little rainbow picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's no clear answer. We see ourselves as all these things, probably reflected in job titles as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so nearly at the end here. So my biggest fear, I love this, that most said none, I have no fear. We are fearless health and safety professionals. But there are a few answers for some of the others as well. And there's probably an interesting point that while we are fearless about health and safety, there's probably a real fear among other parts of the organization, because we are so good, because we're the trusted advisor, we're so knowledgeable, potentially might lead other people in the organization that we're trying to engage with to feel less than an expert. Because I've often heard people say to me, but you're asking me to do this, Karen, but I don't know really what I'm looking for. I wouldn't really know if I was talking about the right thing for health and safety. So there's probably a potential opportunity to create a bit of a minimum standard here for us to take how good we are and what we know as a health and safety professional, and look at what's the basic minimum standard that we need everybody to have that would make them feel comfortable engaging in health and safety. Because clearly we're comfortable, but how do we get everyone else on the same page so that they take that ownership that we were talking about?
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast the other day with Crystal Danbury. I actually posted about it on LinkedIn yesterday. And she was saying that we've got to be better. And this aligns to some of the points made earlier about the challenges of engaging with the senior leadership team. We've got to be better at understanding that if we go into a board meeting and we expect everyone else to kind of shift their mindset to being empathetic and morals based and so on as we are about safety, then that's a mistake. Instead, we need to try and switch our mindset and take some of that lack of fear, into right. I can therefore flip into, let's have this kind of business senior leadership team kind of conversation, which is going to be on a different kind of basis than talking about the sort of softer elements of safety. So I think that maybe is a learning from this.
Yeah, so that could be one of the key opportunities here. We want to get senior management more on board, but we have to recognize that there's a gap. We probably think, well, we want them to get it in the same way we do, but we're coming from a different knowledge base. And we forget that sometimes, because the longer you work in health and safety, the more you just start to assume that other people see things the same way. So how do we...
That's the same in every situation, isn't it? Think of your business or my business, or if anyone else on the call is a consultant or a provider of services or whatever. If your ideal customers knew everything that you knew, then they would buy from you without question. But the reason that they're not necessarily buying, or in this scenario, doing what you want them to do or engaging as we would like them to engage in this scenario, is because they don't know everything that we know, and they don't see the world in the same way that we do. So there is that gap of understanding, and I think that's where we've got to, we've got massive empathy as health and safety professionals. We've got to use that kind of radical empathy to try and see things from their perspective, and we've got to be the ones, I think, to try to make the effort to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I think it's just the power of asking a different question. If we want to know how they see it, we just ask them that. How do you see health and safety? What do you know about it already? What's your vision for it? And we might get something that might surprise us, that will show us where we need to go. So through creating the engagement, asking a different question, creating the engagement, we then get the route to a different and a better outcome. And I know that's not easy, because we have to get through the door first. We have to get a seat at the table before we ask our question, but there are other ways to do it. So last two questions here. If there were one thing that would help you improve employee engagement in health and safety in your organization, it would be, and no surprise here, more commitment from my senior leaders comes up top, and more time to engage people. So this question mirrors what we've seen earlier in the survey. And again, multiple opportunities here. I asked for one thing, but many people have come up with a different one thing. So it's probably about looking at specifically where you are in your company. Where are the specific engagement challenges? And hopefully this discussion today has helped to pinpoint a bit. Is it that it's specific parts of your organization? Is it a lack of consistency around the message? Is it that you're not creating enough space for people to get involved and give their points of view? So there might be something that you've managed to pinpoint today.
Sharon's put an interesting comment into the chat, which is that one of the challenges being able to get in front of this senior team with them having an open mind and being ready to listen. How many of them are fully aware of what the health and safety role is within their business? And I think that is, that piece around definitions and clarity is a really valid one. So thanks for that, Sharon.
Yeah, so sometimes you have to wait a long time to get in front of them. You get a very short space of time, and you have to really think strategically about what you're going to say or what you're going to ask them to make a difference. And then, oh, I thought there was one more here, but I think this is the last one, actually. Yeah, this is the last one. So we are open to questions.
Perfect. So let's, if you want to stop sharing, Karen, if you'd like to come and ask Karen a question or a comment, or you can even ask me a question if you like, then if you're on the Zoom, go to reactions, raise your hand, or you can type it into the chat, and I'll be monitoring questions coming in elsewhere as well. I suppose from me, Karen, so this is a really interesting piece of research, and as we've discussed, there are some kind of clear themes that have come through and plenty of opportunities, etc. What would you advise people to go away and do with this knowledge? How would you sort of take some next steps to, if somebody feels like, engagement is something that I want to improve in my organization, what kind of steps would you suggest people take?
So I guess there's a couple of things that could be done. One really interesting exercise, I think, is to brainstorm, maybe with your health and safety team, brainstorm a list of all the opportunities that you have across the organization to communicate on health and safety. So maybe it's leadership tours, maybe it's safety moments, maybe it's toolbox talks. Where are the opportunities to communicate? So you have that list as a column, and then you create a second list with who are the key stakeholders. And some of them have been mentioned in this research. And make sure you've got HR and comms, internal comms on there, by the way. Is it senior leaders? Is it project managers? So who are the key stakeholders in your business? And then you create a matrix out of those two lists. So you've got one on the x-axis, one on the y-axis. And then in the boxes, detail what outcomes do you want from each of those opportunities with that stakeholder, what's the outcome? And then here's a really interesting thing, because health and safety professionals are really good at the technical, tangible measurement stuff. And there is a perception that something like engagement can be a bit soft and fluffy. But why not take one of your fantastic technical skills like Pareto analysis and apply it to engagement? So that matrix I just asked you to produce, then ask yourself the question, which 20% of my stakeholders hold 80% of the influence in my organization? Because we've already seen that there is so much to go after here. That the question is, where do we start? It's a multifaceted topic. There are so many different groups to engage. Where do we start? And the best way is to focus, to pick off where is the 20% of the organization holding 80% of the influence. And you may decide, for example, that it's senior leadership doing leadership tours. That's just an example. And then you can focus, you can work with them, make sure they've got the right message. You coach them to go and create more engagement. So that's probably a really worthwhile exercise that I would recommend. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I love that. I think that's a really good idea. And I suppose a mindset to have here is that safety and engagement, if we split the two out, or health and safety engagement as a topic, are not a zero-sum game. In other words, there isn't a winner and a loser. It's something that you're constantly working on, constantly shimmying along, constantly looking to improve. So if you can take that strategy, that 80-20 strategy you just said, and put that into place, well, that's going to make things better. And that's all we can really do. We can't measure this down to the nth degree and say we've now cracked it, because there's no such thing as cracking it. It's all about what can we do to incrementally, constantly, consistently improve things.
Yeah, because we're great at measurement in health and safety. We're great at this technical stuff, but we tend to apply it to our incidents, to the technical side. But if we think a bit laterally, we've actually got some great skills that we can start doing to take more of an analysis perspective on our engagement and our stakeholders, to be more strategic and come up with a strategic influence map, so that we're not having to go from one conversation to another. We're actually focusing on the conversations that count.
Mm. And empathy as well, I mentioned empathy before, but if there's one personal trait that health and safety professionals have, it's high empathy in my experience. And we need to use that to our advantage and ask those questions, as you said earlier, Karen, to understand, what are people looking to achieve, what's in it for them, and therefore, how can we understand them better? And if we can understand them, then we can influence them to shift that understanding slightly if we need to, that actually health and safety is really important to what they do and their objectives and where they want to get to.
Yeah, that somebody feeling understood is probably the first step to them doing something differently. So, even before you ask them a question, sometimes you might hear an objection, and it's just listening and echoing that back. I understand you might feel that way. And I guess if I was in that role, I would probably have the same challenges as well. That would make sense to me. So you start to reflect back everything you're hearing before you try and move in a different direction, because feeling heard is a big prerequisite to moving in a different direction.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Karen, tell us, if people want to get the results of the survey, are we able to send them out? Or, I guess people can watch the replay and see the results as we're talking through, but are people able to get hold of them? And then secondly, do you have a next step that you'd recommend? So if somebody is interested in discussing this topic with you more, or working with you to try and kind of solve some of these challenges, or look at some of these opportunities, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I think everybody probably on this call will be in a different place. They may have a bit of an idea of where their engagement challenge is, and it would be a case of trying to understand where you are before you move forward. So going back to question one, the survey results, so they've been revealed now. Today was the big reveal. So I'm more than happy to share them. So if you send me an email, Karen@leaderlike.com, leaderlike.co. Sorry, I just said .com, it's .co.uk. Or maybe I don't know if you can put that on the chat, Christian. So if you send me an
Yep.
email, I'll respond and send you the results. You can have these slides that I presented today, no problem at all. And if you want to have a 20-minute chat on what your challenge is to see if you can find a bit of focus on where you want to start, I'm also open to doing that as well. So just send me an email, and within the confines of my availability, we'll have a chat and see if I can listen to what you're saying and suggest a direction to start on along the lines of that 80-20 rule.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Karen, for today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us as well and for the engagement in the chat. I guess to sum up, I would say that, as Karen really set out, this is a really critical point. And the data showed, to me anyway, that we do have some areas to improve upon if we want to achieve this engagement that we desire. And because it is important and we do desire it, then we should be trying to do it. So do go away, think about this, take on board some of the advice Karen's given you, email her and have a chat, and let's see if we can up our games just that little bit, go for our incremental improvements, because if we can get this right, then the benefits will be massive. So thanks, everybody. Enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you again on another Safety Roundtable soon.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.